Dating, a guide to the unwritten social rules of dating for young men with Asperger's syndrome, and it's published by Jessica Kingsley. And in theory, I receive royalty payments, but I did it to help people. I was diagnosed, as I told you, with Asperger's syndrome as an adult. I'm a board member of the Florida Board of Autism Society. I'm a member of the Florida Atlantic University CARD Constituency Committee and the Education Programming Committee of the Autism Society of America, and I received no compensation for any of these. As a matter of fact, my book a few months ago won the Temple Grandin Award for Excellence in Literature for Autism Society of America. Okay, here is the philosophy of inclusion. This is in theory. To ensure all students have equal access to knowledge, information, and skills. There's a lot of variables that influence this. It's a goal to prepare students for the 21st century American marketplace. They want an educated, flexible population. The goal is to integrate individuals that are minorities from disadvantaged backgrounds or exceptionalities. As a child, there was either no inclusion for me, I went to boarding school for learning differences, or being in a class that was, quote, inclusion, and they just kept me there as long as they tolerated me until I started talking a little too much, then they put me out in the hallway, and that was my inclusion experience. Inclusion is not simply putting someone in a mainstream classroom, but giving them the tools and support to succeed. If I just put someone in a class, they're not going to succeed. If they do, it's out of luck. Before I go on, I want to tell you, if you want to interrupt me with a question or comment, please do. I want you to come away from this having questions answered if I can, and being informed, not just hearing my voice. Teachers must show evidence of differentiated instruction and follow the accommodations in the IEP. And this is in theory. I've seen some teachers where they get the accommodation pages and they are in the desk and never come out of the desk. The realities of inclusion: students with an IEP need to be placed in the least restrictive environment. People that in any state take the state assessment will be placed in a mainstream learning environment unless there are behavioral issues that are significant. In my class that I teach, even though it's regular ed, it's content equivalent, I do have students on the spectrum, but I also have students that are on the spectrum that have emotional behavior disorder. Classes will become more diverse in nature. We're not just going to have a cookie cutter approach. We're going to have many different approaches and many different populations. And students will be held to a higher standard, and this curriculum for a higher standard is going to reflect the reality of inclusion in many states throughout the country. I am sure you've heard about it in Maryland, Common Core. And that's what they're applying along with that to higher standard. But what happens with our kids sometimes when they're in this situation, that it becomes much more difficult for them. Parental concerns about inclusion: until relatively recent past, a significant portion of students with high-functioning autism were not placed in a mainstream learning environment. When I was a child, my parents were told when I was in 6th grade, that's the last grade of elementary school in Canada, that I would have a special diploma. My father, I'm going to give you the rated G version, told them what they could do with their special diploma, and I went to boarding school. When I started teaching public school in Florida, the kids with high-functioning autism were in a contained setting. At this school, I fought for 2 years to get them into regular ed electives, to get them in the cafeteria when everybody else was eating, to get them involved more in the life on the campus. By the time I left, most of the students with high-functioning autism were in the regular ed environment or regular ed supported environment. What level of support will they get? It's a very concerning question for parents. If my child's going in this environment, will he or she get what they need? Will they truly be integrated in the classroom? When I was in elementary school, I was not integrated in the classroom. I spent more time outside of the classroom than in the classroom. I knew the principal on a first-name basis. How will teachers apply differentiation of instruction to meet their needs? Sometimes people look at individuals with autism like the Borg on Star Trek. We're all alike. Well, we're not. You see one of us, you've seen one of us. You see me, my students are quite different. I do not like Minecraft. Will teachers follow the accommodations in the IEP? Again, as I said, I've had people that have been great with this. Other people have not been great with it. Have said, you know what, I don't have to do this. When it is law, it is a legal document. How will the student be received in the mainstream environment? When I was in elementary school, I tried to keep it from my parents. I was bullied throughout. But my parents knew, and very little was done to help me. What will be done to prevent potential bullying? It depends at what school you are. In theory, and I'll be speaking about tomorrow with ASD and bullying, in Maryland, Florida, among all the other states, by federal law, you have to have bullying prevention programs. But there's a wide gulf between programs and the reality in schools. I'm at a fantastic school now, but the last school I was at was not so fantastic. They would look at one of my students being bothered, they'll say they're being overreacting. If someone else did something, they would be treated differently and in a slighter fashion. What conditions will be created to help foster an environment of academic success? It's not enough just having your child in the classroom. What is going to be done to help that child succeed? What accommodations are going to be done? From everything from where they sit in the class to notes. When I was in college, I used somebody else's notes because you know what? It was hard for me to listen to a lecture and take notes because of processing difficulties. Parental role. Parents need to advocate for their child's needs during the IEP. It is not rude asking questions. I tell all my parents, you need to ask questions. If there's something that is bothering you, bring it up. If you feel your questions and needs are not being met, bring in an advocate to the IEP meeting. And I'm a teacher and I'm saying that. To foster an attitude of accountability and responsibility, the younger the better. In my instance, from a very early age, I had to do chores around the house. When I went to boarding school, we had to clean bathrooms, we had to vacuum floors, we had to do things. There's accountability. This needs to be done at home. I had a child a few years ago who had a pet. I said, who takes care of the pet? My mother. Why don't you do the litter box? Oh, I don't want to do that. It's about responsibility because when you're older, there's going to be a lot more responsibility. Help their children become organized and stay so. When I was a child, my story was no matter how hard my mother worked, my backpack, you would open it and you'd probably find Jimmy Hoffa in there. It was so disorganized. To regularly communicate with teachers. Children are not going to tell you everything you want to know, especially a child with autism, 2 reasons. They're not going to want you to know controversies that they were involved in, or they want you to know everything's all right when it may not be all right. That when I was a child, I would so-called protect my parents from the unpleasant things that were happening to me, even though my parents knew. Because one of the misnomers about people with autism, they say, oh, we have difficulty with emotion, we can't show emotion. I've been called by certain people in my family Mr. Spock. Yes, I like him. I don't have his hair. So, but, joking aside, when a person with autism is upset, you can see it. No matter how much I want to hide it, you will know. Make sure their needs are being met. Be their biggest cheerleaders. If they fall and they're behind, put the pillow there to soften the blow. Tell them they can do things. Don't focus on what they can't do. Create an environment at home that will bolster academic success. Homework and priorities. Not playing Minecraft 6 to 8 hours. That it should be a reward and it should be limited. And I would say this even with parents of children that are neurotypical. Neurotypical means those in the room that don't have autism. I'm not neurotypical, I'm an Aspionati. That's what I am. To speak with their child and maintain an open line of communication. You know what? You, the people in the room that are parents, you know your children the best. They will talk to you if you do it in a way that they feel safe and secure. Okay, these are the behavioral and pragmatic issues for students with high-functioning autism. Inappropriate comments. When I was a child, if my parents could get a dime for every time I made an inappropriate comment, they'd be rich. Disinhibition sort of ties in with this. What disinhibition means is that you say what everybody's thinking, but you're going to say it all the time. How I train my students not to do it, I said, think about it, would you want someone to say this to you? Or think about it in your mind, you have a gate. Sometimes that gate needs to be closed. Misreading people's intentions. This is basically contextual blindness or mind blindness, which there's 2 books that are very good. Contextual blindness is by Peter Vermeulen, who's a professor that does autism research in Belgium. It's a very good book. I could give you the information later if you need it. And mind blindness, which was done by Simon Baron-Cohen, and believe it or not, that is Sacha Baron Cohen, Borat's first cousin. Meltdowns. Meltdown just doesn't mean someone yelling and screaming and rolling on the floor. A meltdown for me was tuning out. That you know what? Bye-bye, speak to the hand because I'm not speaking to you. It's done, it's over. Anxiety. If there was anything that I could find to get anxious over, I would. And sometimes still do. Matter of fact, when I had an old car and it took me 6 months to get rid of the perseverative behaviors that tied in with anxiety, that I would check my car because I didn't have one of those clickers. I go around like one of those border collies, check my car again and again and again to make sure it wouldn't get stolen. It took me 6 months to end my behavior. I kept on convincing myself and finally said to myself, who would want this piece of junk anyway? And they're welcome to take it, please. Issues with attending. A lot of kids, especially 30 to 40 years ago, were misdiagnosed with ADHD or ADD that had autism because this is one of the behaviors not everybody with autism has. I did. My teachers have got the, remember the bird cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs? That was me. I was running around the class doing everything but the work because you know what? I saw everything on the wall. I would and see big windows to the outside with the trees, seeing dogs walk by. One of the things with people in a room that are on the spectrum, less is more in that room. Some people say your room looks sparse, your room almost looks like a jail, but it was better for my students. I put the bare minimum on for them so they will not be distracted. They don't let things go. What you will think about for a day or two, we may think about it a year later. The things with Sheldon on Big Bang Theory are really true. But I don't have a roommate agreement with my wife. They can be too passive. They'll accept things too easily. If somebody does something, okay, that's all right. When I was younger, when I still ate McDonald's, if I ordered a hamburger and there's cheese on it, even though I didn't want it, I'd take the hamburger. I wouldn't say, but I didn't order this. Procrastination. I call this the Bobby McFerrin School of Philosophy for Autism. Don't worry, be happy until your world comes crashing down. Obsessive compulsive disorder. Not everybody on the spectrum has it, a lot of people do. There's things that you have that you'll keep on thinking about, and it becomes an OCD when it interferes with your life. What inclusion means for individuals with high-functioning autism: exposure to a less structured environment. When you're in a regular ed class, you have a lot less writing on the board what's going to happen next from others. It's just told to you. The expectations are unspoken usually. They're not reiterated. If you need to know something, sometimes you won't be told. I had teachers that wouldn't just tell you. You know what you need to do it. Greater social demands will be made on them. That when you're in a class of 25 people, it's a big difference from a class of 10 people with an 8 or 2 in there. You are going to have to deal with people whether you like it or not. They will more likely be bullied. It doesn't necessarily have to be the truth. I have a lot of students that have been bullied, more the males than the females. Does anyone know why males with autism are bullied more than females with autism generally? Anyone want to take a guess? The behavior is more outward. Female students are better at hiding it. I had some students, not all of them, that you would not know. You would think this girl was shy and that's it, that she'd keep to herself. I had another one, I had an exception to the rule, the one that told me that she knew everything. But it's more males. They will act out more, and this is with other exceptionalities also. And not all teachers will be supportive, and teachers are less familiar with autism and its manifestations. I've been asked by several of my assistants to talk to mainstream teachers about what these kids are going through and what their needs are. I said, I'm in a new school. I'm not doing that unless the AP or principal says it. Then I will do it. I'm not doing it, but I feel it's important. Education is so important because a lot of people want to do the best for that student, but if you don't have the information, you can't do that. Greater academic demands will be made of them in a mainstream environment. This is especially in high school, especially if they have the aptitude to get into advanced courses. They're not going to say, oh, you could do a smaller assignment. You may get more time on that assignment, but you're going to have to do that assignment. And some teachers will be less patient of their idiosyncrasies. I had a young man that would pick his nails in class until they bled. So I found him a solution. The teacher didn't like the solution. I told him, whenever you're anxious, toss the pencil in your hand, flip it like this. He had better fine motor skills than me. I wish I had his fine motor skills. I guess playing Minecraft does have some benefits. So, he's doing this. The kids with him that are neurotypical are doing it in a row, and the teacher gets upset. So my answer to her was, would you rather pick his nails and have him bleed all over your desk? That he is using that as a coping mechanism. In a practical manner, they will be getting less support. Like my last job, I was an ASD facilitator. I'd go to the classes. I'd like to serve the MacGyver of the middle school world. If my kids had a behavior problem, I dealt with it. I was their social worker. I was their cheerleader. I was their teacher, all these things. Then someone would say, oh, it must be nice not having a class. I said, I'll take your class for a day. Thank you. And help. My homework's in another dimension, the challenge of organization in the inclusion setting. These are personal observations of organization students with high-functioning autism. Many students with high-functioning autism are by and large disorganized. The girl that I told you about that was quiet and shy, she's one of the only people I've ever met with autism that I wish I had her organization system. I told her she was jealous and a smile beamed on her face. Do you want to organize? I asked her to organize my stuff, but most of the time it's not that. You organize them, then a week later, guess what? A mess again. And there's things that we can do, which I'll speak about to help that. And if they're left to their own devices, their marks will suffer. I had a young man I was working with, consulting. He had D's and F's. Guess why? Bobby McFerrin School of Thought and no organization. Just did what he was doing and was failing out of school. And some feel they could use their phenomenal memories to remember assignments instead of writing them. When I was young, I could tell you every baseball player, their averages, the teams they played for, their positions. And I'd tell the teacher, oh, I'll remember the assignment. Guess what happened when I came home? Not there. And it's still a problem now. I was in a doghouse about a year ago. My wife told me to write a grocery list, and I was supposed to get mulch. Guess what? I didn't get mulch, and I was in the doghouse. My wife said, you know what, it's not just an ASD male problem, it's a male problem. And many have difficulty with receptive language skills. I had the young man, the pencil twirler. She was having him watch Brain Pop while taking notes. Could anyone tell me what would be the problem for him? What would he not be able to do? He will not be able to focus on the information. You're asking him to write down notes while listening. We do not do very well on multitasking unless it comes to video games. That's it. Bad multitasking. And they simply forget because it's not a preferred activity. I had one student saying, oh, I didn't do well on this test. So I said, tell me about the different Pokemon characters. And guess what he did for the next 25 minutes? I said, if you could do that, you could use it for an activity that's not as preferred. And organizational solutions. Here's what these are for teachers and parents and specialists. Remind them to write down the assignment then and there. I don't care what they say, what excuse they make. Yes, it's nice you have a photographic memory, but it hasn't been working for you lately. Use calendars on their computer or their smartphone. Most kids have a smartphone today. And a dry erase board is visual reminders for assignments. What the computer, a tablet, or the phone will do, it could send you reminders. You could also get like post-it note, digital post-it notes on a computer so they cannot avoid it and it'll keep on popping up and you could program it to do that. Also, you could use it as a calendar for appointments. You could use it to space out and chunk an assignment. A dry erase board would be very good for two reasons. At home, for what they need to do to put it on the fridge so they see it visually. People on the spectrum do better visually. I need to see it. I don't need to hear you say it. Also, to have a larger dry erase board, and you can get this between $10 to $16 at Walmart, have it where they do homework and make a calendar and put what's due on each day and check it up or cross it off when it's done. Have a visual reminder. The more visual, the better. Regularly check their agendas for assignments and cross-check theirs with other students in class. This is for teachers. The girl with the good organization, I used her to help her friends and used other students. So we got all the homework assignments because some people are better than others. Keep an open line of communications with teachers and parents and guardians. This goes both ways. If I'm a teacher, I want to know if Johnny had a bad time in the morning so I know what I'm going to be dealing with this morning. Because I've had instances when someone comes off the bus and is about to have a meltdown and you have no understanding of why. And for teachers to parents, parents need to know these. What's happening at school? Are they doing well? Are there concerns? One of the things people think is individuals on the spectrum can't lie. Well, they can. Trust me. Oh, there was no homework assignment. And you know what I would do with parents? Several parents, I kept an open line of communication. I emailed them. And a child said, you know, you got me in trouble. You should have written the homework assignment down and not tell them there wasn't anything. Reinforce the concept of responsibility, accountability. The earlier, the better. When a child is young, even taking the dishes off a table to start with and build up from that. And connect it to academics. It's very important because the earlier you do it, the more you do it, the easier it becomes and the more ingrained it will be. Is Jimmy from another planet? The effect of inappropriate comments, musings, and pontificating. When I wrote this, my wife said, that's offensive. I said, you know, not offensive. Been there, done that. My parents questioned things that I would say. Trust me more than I would like to care to tell you. You're seeing me at 46, you're not seeing me at 12. Inappropriate comments and musings, they could range from telling a joke or an off-color one at a bad time. Anything. I've seen it anywhere, any place. Talking with others during class when there's an expectation, being quiet. Why do you think they're talking even though other people know it's quiet? What can't they do?
Control it.
Sometimes they can't control it, or?
Read the social cues.
Very good. They cannot read the social cues or context. They don't want to get in trouble. Or making comments or observations about others that are rude or insensitive. When I was 10 years old, I went with my mother to a friend's house. I asked the lady innocently, why do you have a bald spot? And my mother's looking at me, her face is about to fall on the floor. It's like that Southwest commercial where you absolutely have to get somewhere else, that you want to get out of there. I was very good with that. Or another time that when I was with my grandfather, who was from Victorian era, making chicken dance on the plate in the restaurant, and telling him what I was doing. It was really thrilled. Attempting to get others' attention from inappropriate statements. Why this happens sometimes, it's that they think they're getting friendship from it, that people like them, that they don't read the situation for what it is. And for some kids, because they're really not getting much attention, any attention is good attention, even though they know it's bad. Making statements that are construed as gross, offensive, or disturbing to others. And disrupting the course of class due to statements. I had several kids, and we put this on their IEP. They could only ask a certain amount of questions or make a certain amount of statements in class. And they would get awards, tangible awards, like extra computer time or something that was a preferred activity if they would meet that goal daily. So we would help them. And I had another young man that he would bring up, it was like Seinfeld in class. He would make comments, nothing about nothing. In the middle of a class about ancient Indian history, he asked the teacher about the state of affairs in Kim Jong-il's North Korea. Can you say off the topic? Aspie pedantic outbursts. This is very interesting because what you see with Sheldon, even though Sheldon is not a real person, even though my daughter sometimes calls me him, they really occur. What occurs, these outbursts occur due to the belief, not everybody that's on the spectrum is intellectually superior to other people. They think they know it. Like the girl that told me, I know everything. That I know more than you. And there's ways to deal with it, which I'll tell you. Often it may be connected to the activity at hand. They have to say what they're thinking right away. And this ties in with the disinhibition and having to say what's in their head. They strongly feel they have the right to correct others. I did that all the time. I would correct people's grammar. I would critique things. If my father made something, I'd say it's good, but, and I'd give him the New York Times review, and he'd get angry. Told me if I don't like it, don't find myself another restaurant. I'm giving you the G-rated version. They feel they're inherently correct. They know it. You don't. And have little patience for what others say. When I'm having a bad day, it's not so bad anymore, but when I'm having a bad day, I call them my Sheldon days, I'm more that I have less patience for what people say. But I know at this age to shut my mouth and not say what I'm thinking. If given a chance, I'll talk about a topic for a long period of time. They'll tell you about anything, whether you want to hear it or not. My father, who I suspect is on the spectrum, but he told me what I could do with my diagnosis. One day he was talking to someone about a subject. I could see it because it was not me being involved with it. That's an interesting thing. Being on the spectrum when it's not me, I see someone else doing it, I'm going to absorb it, and that's why you should use video and simulations with kids on the spectrum. That I could see the man wanted to run away. How can he continue talking when that occurs? Feel it is all right to correct what teachers say. I had one young man that corrected a teacher's grammar in front of 25 other students, and she blew up, and this was one of the nicest teachers. He still did not get it. I took him out of the class, I explained it. And turned it around how he would feel. I wanted him to look at it from his situation, because when you're dealing with an individual on the spectrum, they tend to be egocentric, not meaning they're in love with themselves. They look at the world through their own lenses. And that certain things for me have changed that have helped me move away from that, like having an 8-year-old. In their mind, they have a monopoly on the truth. These are the consequences of comments, musings, and pedantic outbursts. Students will less likely be friendly towards them. Why should you be friendly with a know-it-all? My friends in high school called me Higgins. Do you know who I'm talking about? Not from My Fair Lady. Higgins from Magnum P.I. that bloviated and told the long-winded stories that nobody wanted to hear. And that was from friends. They can be seen as disruptive and contentious. If you're correcting a teacher all the time, you're correcting people in your class all the time, you're not going to be welcome. They may be subjected to bullying. Teachers will view them as agitators and disruptive, and this will influence how a teacher approaches a student. Even if they're doing the right thing, they're not going to give them the benefit of the doubt after a while. I had to work with teachers that were sympathetic but were frustrated in showing that the person was making strides so he would be able to take part in class, because he would argue with the teacher over points in the beginning of the year. I felt like I was in a courtroom, like he went on and on and on and say, but I haven't proven my point. You're not going to prove your point. They will socially be isolated, possibly. Because when you're doing all of this, people don't want to be around you. People are not going to give you an opportunity. And teachers will more likely be reticent towards their questions and their participation and won't answer questions. It's not going to happen. And this is what you need to do. It's not going to solve everything, but it'll make things a lot better. Conversational skills 101. Most individuals with high-functioning autism have difficulty conducting a proper conversation. They see little utility in small talk. Until my mid-30s, I had no use for small talk. I did not care about your dog. I did not care about the weather. I wanted to talk about something with substance. But the reality is, in the real world, if you want to get somewhere, you want to get along with people, you need to do small talk. It's very important. As a group, they have difficulty in taking turns and choosing of topics. For a person on the spectrum, especially younger people, a conversation is either all of you or all of them. It's not the middle. What I teach my students, a conversation is reciprocal in nature. It's like a tennis match. What do I do in a tennis match with the ball? Back and forth. You're going back and forth. It's give and take. You're not going to talk on and on and on until the person's eyes glaze over and they maybe fall asleep. Conversational skills make it difficult for individuals with autism to cultivate friendships because they don't know what other people want to talk about sometimes. They want to talk about only what they want to talk about. I even have a young man in my class that was brilliant, but he talks about incredibly inappropriate comments. He was talking about Blue's Clue, and you're in a class, even with ASD kids, that it was frowned upon. And what I did, whenever he did well in the class, I would let kids know, look at this side of him, and try to look at the kindness, try to look at who he is as a person, and help him move away from those topics to more appropriate topics. They may be alienated or even made fun of by their classmates. In high school, I was called the encyclopedia. In college, in my Middle Eastern studies, I was a lifer student. I'm Reformed. I was called, instead of Encyclopedia Iranica, there is an Encyclopedia Iranica, I was called Encyclopedia Jonica by a professor in graduate school. Diplomatic dealing with conversational faux pas. As a parent, teacher, or specialist, redirect students when making comments with neutral language. Why neutral language? What is that going to do? Neutral language is not going to focus everybody's attention on the child and let the child know that we need to go on. Like if a student says something to me, I'll say, you know what, let's talk about it another time. It's not the time now. And they usually leave it. If that doesn't work, sometimes I use planned ignoring. I'm not going to give someone attention to something that's inappropriate. Do not single the student out about their comment. In a regular ed class, what do? They single them out. We'll say this is inappropriate. What could happen? You're giving the person attention, or you're going to have an argument on your hands. Use nonverbal cues like possible, like going to the desk, like putting your hand here, or putting your hand on the person's shoulder, standing closely to the person so they know that you're paying attention and it needs to stop. Model correct ways of speaking to others. You could do this one-on-one or in a group. When appropriate, use specific praise when the student interacts with others correctly in conversation. Why specific praise? Right. You have to know what you're praising. If you don't know, it means nothing. If someone says, good job to me, good job for what? Whatever. Encourage students to show kindness and patience for those who have difficulties speaking with others. So what I would do, I made it my business to know the kids in mainstream classes. And I would see the kids that were more empathetic and kids that would come to me with concern. And I would sell these kids, tell them positives about these kids. Things that they could do to help me, but would be helping the kids and be helping themselves. That it was all upside when it's the right kids. Improving conversational skills through role play and improvisation. How I got this, I sort of poached this idea. When I was in boarding school 30 years ago, they actually did this. We had to do simulations on videotape. And it's very important because it works with our kids. Because they work best by doing and by seeing and by analyzing. And as I said, we learn best by visually and doing. First, students watch the teacher and assistant do non-examples and examples. And what I would suggest with the non-examples, make them as crazy as possible. Why would I do that? You get their attention, you get them to see what's happening, you get them invested in it, you get them interested in it. As a matter of fact, when I had students do it, I had a student that had no behavior problems whatsoever, and I let him play Evil Matthew, and he adored it. And guess what he did? He was a quiet kid. Guess what elective he took the next year? Drama. So I got him out of his shell. He helped his friends, and he helped himself. And make students verbally recall what occurred in a scenario. How I'd call it is you watch NCIS and you have Ducky, who's a pathologist of bodies. They need to be a pathologist of social situations. Analyze, analyze, analyze. And that will help them. And we're very good, that's one of our strong points, is analyzing situations. As students get better in identifying skills taught, Have them identify whether the behavior was correct or not, and make it be a discussion. It has to be open-ended, because if you say yes or no, you don't have them think about it. And make them use metacognitive thought, which is a tongue twister. It's thinking about the thinking process, making them actively think about what is occurring. And have the students role play, applying different conversational skills. It'll get them to generalize it more and get them to learn it, get them to assimilate it, and it's going to get them off on their feet, doing something that they're going to enjoy. And students will use the skills in a variety of settings. You have to encourage generalization. Parents have to be involved in this too, so it can be generalized even further. Dealing with anger management, learning to think instead of reacting. Causes of anger for students with high functioning autism. People instigating and bothering them. And this may be happening, it may not. The pencil twirler got upset very badly one day. He went to a fountain. He turned it on, it went all over him. The spigot was turned, he didn't realize it. He had a total meltdown, he thought it was geared towards him. When he calmed down, I walked him through it, I used metacognition, and I got him to think about it. And the conclusion I had him come to is, whoever was going to go there next was going to have it all over their shirt. It happened to him again a year later, and he was not upset that time. Because it could have been anybody. And it's teaching them to know the difference between being bullied and not being bullied. I sometimes still have trouble knowing whether someone's joking with me or not. And someone would say, how is this? You've gone to graduate school twice. That there's a difference between intellect and social cognition when you have someone on the spectrum. They could be the brightest person in the room. They may not get it. They misinterpret people's intention because they don't get abstract language as well. They don't get idioms. They cannot infer a situation. They don't read social contextual clues as well. Body language. Viewing people as being overly critical. If someone says something that's constructive criticism, they feel like they're being attacked, even though that's not the case sometimes. Having difficulty with an assignment. One of my students' favorite things was that he would forget about it, or one day he went into the room in my friend's room, and my friend was incredible with them. He runs in the room, she says, "This is your assignment." He flips her off, he throws the calculator across the room, rips the test. And she disarmed him totally and said, "Good morning to you too." Feeling that people don't respect them. And you know what? A lot of times when I was younger, I had situations where people didn't. And after a while, you become very sensitive to things. You want to be treated like everybody else. Someone disagreeing with their point of view because they're right and you're not. Difficulty accepting someone else's point of view. And inflexibility and the desire to be right. Things have to be done a certain way. I had a student the other day that I forgot a word when I was reading to them from a book. I did not wear my glasses. Yes, I'm denying my aging. And he said he didn't say this. He did it a few times and said, "Thank you very much. I needed that." And it was sarcastic. And I teach them sarcasm and other things so they know how to deal with it. I make it into a teachable moment instead of getting upset. Strategies for dealing with anger. Put setbacks into perspective. If you didn't do well on this test, there's the next test. Learn from your mistakes. Listen to what someone's actually saying. I've been accused of that by my wife. My wife said, "You're listening to what you think I'm saying. It's not what I said." And so thinking about it, learning that people are entitled to their point of view. You know what? I'm entitled to my point of view. I had to deal with this with my daughter a few years ago that I think is possibly on the spectrum. She told all her daycare workers who they needed to vote for in the 2012 election. I was horrified. I said, you know what? People have a right to vote for who they want to. That's what makes this country great. And she argued with me over the point. That simply ignore provocative statements. Some kids will say something to get get something out of you, ignore it. And this is for people with autism, this is for teachers, this is for everybody. If someone's bothering you, go to an adult instead of acting. I had a young man years ago, whenever he got upset, he'd act like one of the Transformers. So what do you think the bullies at the school would do with him? Get him upset so they could have their floor show. So I saw this and I said, you know, if something's bothering, come to me. If I'm not around, go to another adult. But also, ignore them. It's not worth it. Think before acting. Express your feelings in an appropriate manner rather than getting angry. There's always a better way to say it. Example of this, I was annoyed with someone when I was at boarding school. I'm giving you the rated G version of what I did. I called someone something not so nice. This was a tutor I had before at boarding school. I didn't like him because he pushed me and he reminded me of an extra from Hair. I'm really aging myself. That's a movie about hippies from the late 60s. So one day I said something really nasty to someone, really nasty, and you didn't really need your imagination for it. Instead of getting angry at me, he said, "Why do you say that?" Because I said sarcastically, because I wanted to upset them. Instead of getting angrier, he said, "Do you know what that means?" Then gives me the Oxford English Dictionary definition of it. How would you like if someone said that to you? So it's making you think about it, how someone else would feel, and it's making you be responsible for yourself instead of creating a confrontation or punishing someone. Putting things in perspective and look at a situation in a realistic manner. If you can't do something today, you may be able to do it the next day. I had a child that I first got this year. He was like doom and gloom. He looks like someone from a retirement home, even though he's 11 years old. Wouldn't talk to anyone, man of a few words. By the time I got to him and my assistant got to him, he's talking to most of the people, with the exception of one kid. He's saying, "Mr. Miller, do you mind if I watch this video out there in class?" I said, "If we have time." We didn't have time that time. At the beginning of the year, he would have had a meltdown. Now he isn't. Because I'm working with him and getting him to look at things in a different way to avoid that anger. If you don't ask, you won't know. The art and necessity of self-advocacy. Self-advocacy is a very big problem for people with autism for a variety of reasons, which I'm going to go in now. And this is why we don't speak up for ourselves. We're afraid people won't listen when we're kids. We had a lot of people not listen. I was called the unusual kid. I, unfortunately, when I was in elementary school, was called the retard. So I've been